Oh, here we go. This hangout is live and late. It's 8:35 instead of 8:30. Honestly, because I completely forgot as soon as I started doing my morning things, invoices for a company I do some stuff for on a contract, and editing. I'm creating this page for Becca Truly Stewart for the Patreon gifts surprise boxes that she makes. It brings me so much joy to edit a conversation that we had into a little explanation video, and then to go onto my website and create a page that features that edited video as an invitation to get to know Miss Becca Truly Stewart and what it is that she's doing. So I just do what's in front of me and get really engrossed. And then for some reason, I looked up at the clock on my computer screen and it said 8:32. And that internal clock calendar notification went, oh yeah, I've got a show on today, don't I? I've got a oneness talking point. And funnily enough, this morning's topic is allowing. I just looked at my desk calendar. It's this great big, fabulous piece of paper that sits on my desk that tells me when money comes out, when my appointments are, just the important kind of scan over and see what's going on things. So I'm a little bit organized as far as having notifications set up. I usually get alerts that tell me this thing is starting in 10 minutes or you have a bill due in 7 days. So I kind of set all that automatic stuff up the same way that you put contact numbers into a contact book, an address book, or you put them into your list of contacts on your phone, or, however it is that you do it, so that you don't have to walk around with all of that information and have to recall it every time you need it, which seems to take up a lot of cognitive processing power for me. There are some things that I remember inanely, like there just doesn't seem to be any logic to why I remember those things. For the longest time, I remembered my first account number, which I hadn't had for, like 20 years, but I still remembered it. It was this thing that stuck in my brain. And there are other things like that seem to stay there regardless of how much more information goes into I don't know, my storage system, however that works, which is very different to the way doctors expect me to remember things and academics expect me to remember things, and even like readers, audience members, clients expect you to remember things in a particular way, probably because that's how they remember things. They recall life as a series of events, and they kind of block those events into days and weeks and years. They block those events into what happened at work and what happened at home, what happened on Monday, what happened in the year that I lost my job. And they seem to have this concertina ability to relate all of those things in this very linear, subject category oriented way. My brain just doesn't work like that. It's It draws lines between things that can't function in a linear structure. So the relevance of one thing to another, like if I say rabbit, you think whatever you think, the lines that I draw between things don't match up with the questions that people ask to retrieve that information. So I'm obviously not mapping it out the way that people are expecting. And I have come to allow that to be on purpose instead of seeing it as some kind of specialty or some kind of deficit, which is often what we do if we find that we can't function the way it's expected. We'll either deem ourselves, some kind of new breed of human capable of skills that nobody recognizes yet, or we'll put ourselves, we'll diagnose it and say, oh, that's a function of my personality type, or that's a function of my whatever, which explains it and diminishes us at the same time. But at least it gives us a sense of security and certainty because we know why we're not fitting the mold. And it always comes back to the fact that not fitting the mold is a fact. Like that's the solid center foundation that needs to be explained. There's no questioning or analysis or allowing of that to be perfect for your purpose. There's no allowing for that to be something sacred. The foundation is a solid thing that exists in and of itself. I don't fit the mold. Therefore, I think often the art of allowing begins with, well, what if it wasn't that I didn't fit the mold? What if there was some other way of experiencing it or understanding it? What would it be if it was already on purpose? What would it mean if it was sacred? How would I explain it if I wanted an angel script version of what's going on? And that's my experience of the art of allowing, which is not a prescription. And I don't think it's a generic explanation. I don't think the art of allowing is necessarily the same for everyone. I think we all have our own language around it. We all have our own expectations of it. We all have our own sense of what it is to flow. I was talking to a beautiful friend of mine the other day, and they were explaining their concept of flow. And it's just a bit different to my concept. My concept is everything is flow. So how can I be with what's going on if I accept that it's flow? So another way of understanding that question is, where do I need to stand in order to see that even this is sacred? And that question makes sense to some people and not to others. And so depending on the person I'm talking to, depending on the client or the audience, the question will be different. And the question is not asking you to find an answer. It's just asking you to ask the question. So what happens for you when you ask the question? And for me, that's the beautiful thing about the art of allowing, is there's no need for that outcome, expectation, result, evidence, reality. That story, that the art of allowing will get you a life of flow, or the art of allowing will allow you to be prosperous, or the art of allowing will give you the ability to hear an aversion of events, will allow you to hear a version of events that, I don't know, that's special, that other people can't hear, that calms you down, that makes you healthy, that gives you power, that gives you insight, that heightens your frequency, that, stops challenges or allows challenges to crumble or removes obstacles, or, whatever it is that seems to be the outcome of desire in that particular situation. Whereas in my experience, my concept of the art of allowing, it's the evidence and the outcomes and the results that are removed. They exist in the story that other people tell and that they ask of me, that they ask me to explain of my experience, but they don't exist in my presence to this experience. They don't exist in the reality of this experience. They don't exist as a notion that I'm attached to. I came across an advertisement for a new book, a refurbished book maybe. After some stuff that I read this morning, I'm not sure that it's a new book. And when I first found their website, as a marketing design product person who loves making packaging, who loves designing digital pages and, that whole user experience, the rounded edges and the colors and the sounds. And I found their site instantly gratifying. And there's no way I can replicate it because it's based on the experience of outcomes, of knowing. And that's the one thing I can't do, is know. I can't know. I can have an experience of feeling certain. I can have an experience of trusting one fact, aka story, over another as an explanation of something. That's not the same thing as knowing. It's the knowing makes it concrete. The knowing makes it a structured universe that's, made of steel, that's physical, that can be navigated. The art of allowing and not knowing is ephemeral. It allows an experience of, think about the concept of science, the cutting edge of what you can trust, studies and research and experts that know what they're talking about, which at no point in history has ever been concrete and fixed and unchanging. There's always this kind of forefront of the information that we can trust, the experts that know what they're talking about, or that are willing to do the research with the new instruments that we have and ask the relevant, pertinent questions and be, aware or conscious or open to the evidence, which must be interpreted in a particular way that's cogent, cohesive with what's going on at the moment. So you can have the same information and two people can take that same information and draw two conclusions. You can add a new instrument into that conversation, some new research gathered with that new instrument, and those two people will still have two different conclusions, two different interpretations of what that research via that new instrument adds to the conversation. So, and I'm talking, like the same experts in the same field who went through the same processes and universities and degrees to get to the same point in their career in the world, and they still come out with not necessarily opposing views, but different interpretations, different conclusions of what's going on. So for me, all of that I guess it feels like evidence of allowing. It feels like evidence of the fact that we don't know, that we're in this constant state of curiosity, and we may make conclusions about the evidence that we think we have access to, but ultimately it's never stopped. There's never been a point where we've stopped being present to some radical shift in physics or medicine or biology or geography, or, you know, it doesn't, whatever you want to call science, the information has never been static. The truth, the scientific truth, has never been static. You know, we're constantly finding new ways to interpret, new conclusions about the same information that we have via the new instruments and tools, which allows us to conduct research that we didn't conduct before, which just adds more information into the mix. And we're just constantly churning out this new truth and a new truth and a new truth and a new picture of how the universe works, and a new explanation of why the body does what it does, and a new explanation of why relationships are the way they are, and a new explanation of psychosis and psychology and the psychodynamic theories about human evolution and development and social ecology and blah, blah, blah. So for me, the fact that I can't find one point, you know, there's religious exegesis. It's constantly being reviewed and renewed to be relevant to the culture. And not just the culture of now, because the culture of now in this room with this person is not the same as the culture of now with the people next door. They've got a completely different perspective of what the culture of now is. And we were probably brought up in the same country, in the same education system, with the same language, you know. So it's not about creating some consistent access point, because even with those consistent access points, I'm trying not to be sexy. Let's get rid of that shoulder there. Even with the consistent access points, you know, same genes, same school, same parents, it's not the same. There's some alchemy going on that means, for me, that the art of allowing is relevant. If there was a structure that I discovered that I felt like I could trust and rely on, that looked and felt real, then in a second I would jump on it, because certainty is fabulous. You know, it would allow me to market things and sell things and be something very different to what I am. And it's not that I'm uncomfortable with what I am, but certainty is, there's an appeal, you know. And I think part of my curiosity is about why it's so appealing, as much as it is an inability to attach myself to it, because I can't find evidence for it. You know, and there's some because in there that can't be named, that has no language. There's some because that for me always comes back to I am, life is. The one truth at the heart of any question. Everything can be traced back to that point, which is this obscure, unknowable thing. You know, the one point allows for itself to be an obscure, unknowable thing as much as it allows any moment to be an obscure, unknowable thing. So it's not just about being curious. You know, we often separate the participant from the observer, like, oh, if I'm in thinking mode, I'm being curious. But when I'm participating, I'm having reactions. I think the concept of having a reaction requires certainty, requires separateness. In oneness, the art of allowing doesn't label it a reaction because there's no act separate from the participant. So the being and doing are one. And the art of allowing includes the being and doing of oneness. Oneness that appears to be humans, oneness that appears to be separate, oneness that appears to be humans operating in separation, believing, trusting that that's the reality that they have. Oneness that allows humans who believe themselves to be separate in a very concrete notion of how it all works. I was thinking about the other day, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to articulate it, but I'm going to give it a go. I was thinking about oneness, excuse me, as the number 10. So there's often a story that oneness is the collective ideas of everyone who all bring a certain color or vibration to the spectrum. And when you add all those things together, they make oneness, right? My understanding of oneness doesn't work like that. We don't add everything together in order for oneness to exist. Oneness is the expression of all of those things. So in the analogy of number 10, so number 10 isn't an amalgam of all the other numbers. So you don't add 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7 plus 8 plus 9. That doesn't equal 10. And neither is 10 an evolution from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. You get the picture? Because 10 is also 21 minus 11, you know, or the square root of 100 or whatever it is. You know, like there's no, it's not an evolution and it's not an amalgam. And it doesn't exist in a vacuum in and of itself. Oneness is what it is. I mean, it is what is for me. And like the number 10, you can see it as an evolution, or you can see it as an amalgam, or you can see it as the square root of something, or you can see it as the conclusion to some other sum. You can see it as part of an equation of physics. You can see it as the number of children in a family. You can see it as the IQ that diminishes, separates an animal from an adult human. You can see it in all those ways. But 10 is just 10. And it's going to continue to be 10 no matter how you treat it, no matter what story you tell about it. It's going to be 10. There's a function of oneness that allows all of those stories to be true, even when those stories argue with one another. Even when it's a 5-year-old who's being given a question that the teacher tells them they've gotten wrong. They've said it's 10 and the teacher says it's not. Even then, oneness is exactly where it needs to be, in that sum that that child has been told is an error. There's a way of there's it. I mean, all I can say is it, because I don't have, because there's no substance to it. It's not like it's a certain amount of atoms. Atoms themselves are a function of oneness. So there's no time, space, dimensionality to it that requires it to be named and interacted with. You know, like that whole God is inside everything. Oneness isn't inside everything. Oneness is. So it's the reality where there isn't things, no atoms and no space, no whatever we call consciousness. And it's the reality where there is things. It's the reality of everybody's story about that stuff. And it's relevant to the art of allowing, because that version of oneness is what allows me to have my being doing experience and not need it to be true for anyone else, not need it to have evidence of it, not need to find conclusions and evidence that it's doing something. I trust that 10 is 10, no matter which equation you put it in. I trust that it's there for a reason. I trust that it's always on purpose, that it's having its experience, for want of a better word, because we don't have a language for that process. Not without going into separation, which isn't part of my art of allowing, except in the stories that I allow other people to have. So that line between being and doing, that doesn't exist for me. Just trying to figure out a way to articulate I am, full stop. I am oneness. So there's no self that ends, that's bounded, that can be known separate from other selves. There's no self that can be known separate from the whole. If you follow me to the edges, you will go all the way to oneness. You will only find oneness. So the perceived experience is important to oneness. Otherwise, it wouldn't be here. In the art of allowing. So at the same time, oneness is being and doing. And as a function of oneness being and doing, I look like I have a body to people who can see bodies. And I feel like a person according to the cultural nominations of what that personhood manifests as. And all of those looks likes are in a constant state of change. So we think of them as moments. I can't tell you how oneness thinks about them. Even the concept of thought is a function of oneness. So that's why I like that Richard statement, life is. Or sometimes I would just say, what is? Because I look like I have a body to people who can see bodies, but I can see things beyond bodies. When I meet someone or encounter someone, however you want to understand that, I get a lot more information than their physical, their so-called physical versus non-physical form. Maybe that's what allows me to see the boundlessness between those things, the physical and non-physical. Somewhere they're all tied in together. I was going to say, we don't need to go into that, but somewhere it is the being and doing as one is tied into this conversation about the physical and non-physical are one. Like for me, I can't see the line between them. Even when I research in, like the scientific field of physics and biology, there's no way to separate the physical from non-physical. It's this kind of arbitrary everyday experience line that we draw. But it doesn't actually exist. You can't really back it up in any scientific sense, that dividing line between physical and non-physical, which is why I've never understood the concept of metaphysics. There's nothing above physics. There's just physics. If you have metaphysics, you've created a separation. And the whole concept of oneness is that it's just one field. It's just oneness. So there's no meta anything. There's no soul, there's no spirit, there's no God that can be known separate from that one field, that one spectrum. There's no higher and lower, as in good and bad, vibrations. There's no better and worse outcomes. There's no crisis and calm. There's no chaos and order separate from oneness. And so the ranking that goes on and the experience of desire and aversion, for me, in the art of allowing, are part of the oneness experience. Not as a means to an end, to learn something so that we can evolve towards some different planetary experience. Simply as all that is rearranging itself in any moment. And if you could see the order in that, if you could see it as rearrangement, then that's how you would label it. But you can't, and you can't see it for a reason, because you are oneness manifest, having the experience that can't see what you can't see and can see what you can in the art of allowing. And that's where that participant observer or being and doing divide doesn't exist, which reminds me of that will versus fate. conversation. You can label it what you want. But in the art of allowing in oneness, a cosmology that sees all things as divine, as sacred, as equally valuable. I think the sacredness and the divinity kind of gets caught up in this religious conversation. But the sacredness and the divinity is really just about equal value. All of the experiences are of equal value. All of the manifestations of oneness are of equal value. They feel crappy, and they feel crappy for a reason. In oneness, in the cosmology of oneness, standing in the place where you trust that everything and everyone is oneness, then the feeling crappy is part of that. And the being and doing of feeling crappy, the being and doingness as one thing when you're feeling crappy is allowing that experience. And I think where people get confused sometimes is they think allowing and surrender are about, kind of putting your hands up and going, oh, I feel crappy, I'm just going to lay down and die. Allowing a feeling, allowing an experience to be sacred, to be equally valuable, includes all of the other stuff that's going on. Stuff that you've labeled internal conversation, stuff that you've labeled reaction, stuff that you've labeled external influences, stuff that you've labeled relationship, stuff that you've labeled obligations, social requirements, politeness, politics, paying your bills. It includes all of that. And we're so used to dividing it up and saying these things are relevant, and when I'm present to this moment, all of that stuff disappears. We're used to having this picture and story of the world and our experience from that concrete foundational point that says, I am separate. This is happening to me for a reason. And if I can figure out that reason, I can have a catharsis of whatever consciousness, and I can get out of that experience into a better experience where I know I deserve something else and better things will happen to me and I won't feel so crappy. Whereas in the oneness experience of allowing, the crappiness is already sacred. So you're not trying to get out of anything, and you're not separating yourself from all of the things that are going on. You're not separating yourself from the bills or the neighbors or any of those things. All of those things are part of your cosmic conversation in this moment, present to the art of allowing in oneness. And it's the wholeness. That's the real point of difference, I think. In my understanding of the art of allowing, it's that wholeness where everything is relevant, which is not the same as saying everything is a sign. Everything is a confirmation. Everything is an opportunity to learn. There's no learning because you're not trying to get out of it, and you always are exactly where you need to be, and the wholeness of you is already sacred. There's no parts that you need to get rid of. There's no parts that you need to celebrate more than any other part. They're all equally sacred. They're all of equal value because they're all just proponents of oneness, having an experience in the art of allowing, which is the cosmology that you are having an experience of thanks to oneness manifesting as this thing that seems like you. Which I hope doesn't sound as convoluted as it does when I say it out loud. Hopefully there's some sense that it's a little bit, logical. And I feel like if I could draw a picture of it, it would make more sense. And maybe that's what I need to do, is draw pictures of it. But it's very difficult to draw pictures of things that don't have form. You know, like if I say oneness is a bucket of sand, or, you know, oneness is a spectrum of light, or oneness isn't anything that I can draw a picture of. There's no way for me to visually represent what I'm talking about. And even the metaphors that I try and use to make it clearer to myself how to articulate it, because I'm not doing this to convince you of anything. I'm not doing this to convert you or make your life better. I'm doing it in my art of allowing in this moment, according to the instructions that I am being given. Instructions that include things that we have labeled relationships and bills and neighbors and politics. Instructions that include pain and, you know, doctors and things like that. Things that we kind of take for granted are an upset in the homeostasis of all that is. Stuff that is included in the perfection of wholeness in the art of allowing, which says if the homeostasis according to cultural norms doesn't exist here, it exists in that bigger picture of wholeness. And whatever's going on here that looks like an imbalance is sacred in and of itself. Where do I need to stand in order to see the divine in this? Where do I need to stand in order to be present to the perfection of my wholeness? Which is the question I ask myself, because I exist in the state of trust. Not as something that I learnt to do, something that I learnt to articulate that I was already doing. You know, and that articulation has gone through different languages over time. It has gone through the language of separation, because that's the only one that I had, and at the time, that's the only one I needed. And so there's all this evidence of the stories that I've told at different points in the perfection of who I was that are in the language of separation, for the same reason that everything else happens. Life is what is, however you want to conclude that. And so I don't understand it as an evolution that I've learnt something different that I can now teach other people, who can then have another experience and get a different outcome. For me, it is just an alchemy. In this moment, say these words, have these feelings, feel this pain, meet this person, see this sparkle, know this story. And that's enough for me. You know, and you can follow that to the end. That's enough for me, because that's the experience that oneness is having, as the illusion of me as a separate thing, which I trust isn't separate, and don't have an experience of as concrete and fixed and knowable. And if I was talking to you, I would say, well, what is your experience? If it isn't the art of allowing, and it isn't, or if it is, if you call it the art of allowing and it's something different, then how is it for you? Because in our encounter, I would recognize you as equally valuable, equally sacred. I would recognize you as an expression of oneness. as a manifestation of oneness, as an experience of oneness. Same oneness, that's everything. So I would be curious, because that's my job. That's oneness experience as me. Curiosity, curious compassion, not knowing, art of allowing. That's all my ness. That's all oneness, having an experience as a thing that looks like a person in a linear reality. In a linear reality where the persons are starting to realize that it's not so damn linear. So what is your oneness experience? What is oneness experiencing through you, as you? That's more interesting than anything I have to say. The end. And then next week, what have I got? Oh, I can't remember. Wait, I might know. Let me be tricky on another screen. Transformation. Oh yeah, baby, that's going to be a good one. So I have some very unique ideas, or I should say oneness experiencing as me has some very unique ideas, because I don't take authorship of any of the stuff. Same as I don't take credit for any of the things that it looks like I'm doing, because there's no doing separate from being, and you're not separate from me, so I can't do anything to you because it's not a ping pong universe. According to the art of allowing. And I love you just the way you are, and I'll see you next week.